Welcome, America, to a very important town hall. The topic is guns, gun laws, Second Amendment rights, and the politics of owning a firearm in America. Besides being a major 2020 campaign issue, the gun debate is dividing America. We will take a deep dive into mass shootings, why they are so prevalent in America, and what we can do to stop them. We will hear from gun rights advocates and gun control groups. We will hear from Andrew Pollack, who lost his beautiful daughter, Meadow, to a mass shooting event in Parkland, Florida. We'll also hear from a therapist who has experience with victims of mass shootings. And most importantly, we will hear from you, America. This will be a fair, balanced, and unbiased hour every American should watch with our family. So let's get right to it. Following the deadly shootings in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas, Democratic presidential candidates have been calling on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to end the Senate's early recess, and they want to vote on gun control legislation. Sinclair national correspondent Angelica Alvarez talks to experts on both sides of the issue and gives us a look into what Americans are thinking when it comes to gun laws.
On the heels of two mass shootings where more than 30 people were killed, Democratic lawmakers say Congress should cut its August recess short, come back to Washington, and tackle gun legislation.
The Senate can take action.
Andrew Patrick is with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. He says lawmakers should pass universal background checks and fund gun violence protection research.
The House can come back and pass an assault weapons ban.
Dr. John Lott is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He cautions Congress to be careful with any legislation they might pass.
I think the irony is that we pass gun control regulations, and they make it so that the victims, rather than the killers, obey the laws.
Whether lawmakers come back early or after Labor Day, they will be paying attention to the polls and what Americans are thinking. While some polls show Americans think something should be done, they struggle with what?
More than 9 out of 10 voters say, yeah, there should be modest restrictions like background checks on gun ownership, that they think that's kind of common sense.
But pollster Scott Rasmussen says only 38% of voters think background checks or other measures would actually reduce gun violence, and only 28% of voters believe in a total ban on guns. Overall numbers from gunviolencearchive.org shows mass shootings make up a fraction of gun violence, but Rasmussen points out they do capture more national attention.
Because it could happen in your neighborhood anytime, and who would know?
In Washington, I'm Angelica Alvarez.
And we assemble a panel of experts for this gun town hall. John Lott, president, you saw him in that video, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of The War on Guns, More Guns, Less Crime. And we also have with us Andrew Pollack, father of Meadow Pollack, who was one of the victims of the crazed maniac who walked into Parkland High School in Florida and unleashed hell upon innocent students. Anthony Tall, nationally known Democratic strategist and experienced attorney. Amy Ream is a licensed professional counselor in professional private practice. Her expertise in recovery work allowed her to respond to the needs of the Las Vegas shooting in the aftermath of the most deadly mass shooting in American history. She has contributed to this book and has her firsthand knowledge of the long impact of these mass shootings. I'm going to start with you, Amy. Just do us a favor and set the stage as far as how are people dealing with this. We're a couple of years out, almost a couple of years out now, on the deadliest mass shooting in American history. Have the people of Las Vegas, of America, come to terms with the shooting?
I'm not sure if they can ever really come to terms, and there are still plenty of people that are seeking professional help because of the fallout. I think our community has come together, and we honor that in great detail. But there's still problems. There's still issues with people.
And Andrew, as one father who's lost a loved one, a child, to another, tell me about what you're going through a little more than a year since Parkland.
Well, first, everyone handles it different. So I can speak for myself, and I'll never be the same. No therapist or therapy was going to help me, because the only thing that could help me is bringing my daughter back. So I focused on, exposing the failures, and that helps, and bringing accountability to what happened and that the people that failed my daughter that allowed it to happen in Parkland. And that's what I focus on. I really don't look at the past.
Well, tell us about that, Andrew. If you will you tell us who you think failed Meadow?
Oh, I could sit here for a while and tell you. But there's a lot of people that failed my daughter, and a lot of policies that are still in place. One of the policies is that's very important is wasn't arresting kids when they committed crime and not holding them accountable. We saw that there was a big similarity with the shooting in Dayton, where that person also threatened lives of students. He had a rape list, a kill list, very similar to what happened in Parkland with my daughter's murderer. And neither one of them was ever arrested, which if they would have been arrested, they never would have been able to buy a rifle. So that's what I focus on. You know, kids need accountability, and there's policies in place that we need addressing where it would help.
What do you think, Anthony? Are there ways that you think that we can stop? We see proliferation of mass shootings in America. Frankly, two in a 24-hour period a couple of weeks ago. What's the answer? What should we be looking at?
I think we need to. I think we need to go to the root cause, and we just kind of need to figure out why we're so angry. Why do we live in a culture, in a country where everyone is so upset and everyone has? I mean, we can talk about mental health issues. I get that, but there's something else going on underneath, where there's just an anger with everyone in this country. Not to speak too generally, but with a lot of people in this country, I think a lot of people feel left out. I grew up around guns. My dad was a veteran. My brother is a veteran. I personally have never owned a gun. I've seen my dad come home and swing it around. Great guy who I loved. He passed away years ago. But I see the danger of guns, and we're all seeing the effect
danger of guns, or is it danger of people owning the guns?
I think it's the danger of people owning the guns. But I think we need to know who's owning the guns.
My point being, you seem to be pointing at the gun rather than, I know you love your father, but anyone that comes home and swings a gun around in front of a child shouldn't probably be owning a gun.
Well, to that point, my dad was a veteran, licensed, member of NRA. And there's some times where he would come home and have a little too much to drink, and he wanted to show off his gun. And I think statistically that's what happens. So maybe not so much the gun, but the people who have the gun and the things that they go through. There has to be something we can do to figure out what's going on.
John Lott, Anthony brought up statistics. You are the go-to source for statistics in gun laws and gun crime in America. Tell us what the statistics bear out.
Well, I mean, one of the things is that the United States is hardly unique in terms of these mass public shootings. I mean, you look at per capita rates, France, Russia, Finland, many countries in Europe have murder rates from mass public shootings that are higher, or at least as high as what we have here in the United States. But, you mentioned anger for people. I think the vast majority of people who are committing these horrible crimes are people who want to commit suicide, but they want to commit suicide in a way that's going to get them attention, that people will know that they were here. They're not people that have political causes. Over 70% of these mass public shooters, you can't identify any political beliefs that they have for them or any particular religious beliefs. They're just people that know that when you read their diaries, the big things that come through is the amount of planning that they put in there. Their goal is to go and kill more people than some other attack has killed, simply because they say, if I can kill more people than such and such killed, I can get even more media attention, more worldwide attention.
Well, why should we make it easier for them? And I get the idea that I've been a criminal defense attorney for 18 years. I get the idea that there's always going to be someone who will find a way to commit a crime. But it takes a little more time to drive a car into a bunch of people. It takes a little more time to plan and set up a bomb. It's just easier. Why should we make it easier?
I don't want to make it easier. I want to make it harder.
Where someone can just go in and shoot.
But the way I want to make it harder is probably different than the way you do. What I look at is about 95% of these mass public shootings have taken place in gun-free zones, places where we ban the victims from being able to go and defend themselves. These killers aren't stupid. They may be crazy in some sense, but they want to kill as many people as possible. And in their planning, they have figured out if they go to a place where victims can't defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people.
Called soft targets. Yeah. Called soft targets. I want to stay on this for a second, but I want to bring Amy in here. Amy, is there... Now, John's going to refute this. I know John is going to refute this, but is it me or is it the vast majority of these mass shootings are younger males, almost typically younger white males? What's going on?
I think it's important for us to look at the isolation that people are feeling in the communities. And in my practice, I am seeing a lot of young males. And, I don't think that we can just blame mental health I think that we have to look at more factors such as employment, drug and alcohol use, abandonment by families.
Let's stay on that for a second. Drugs, and full disclosure, one of Amy's friends is also someone I've spoken to quite extensively. A friend of mine, Melissa Glazer. I asked her, "Is it drugs? Is it these young men aren't on their psychedelic drugs or their assistant drugs or antidepressants?" And she said, "No, it's sometimes they're coming off them too soon."
Right. They sometimes don't have health care, so they can't wean off of the medication like you're supposed to. But it's a combination of factors. It's not just one isolated
Video
factor.
games. The president has pointed out video games. Do video games play a factor in mass shooters?
I don't personally believe so. I've never seen research that supported that. Over time, you see many countries with high rates of video dependency, video usage, very high without the mass shootings.
John, video games play a role at all?
I think I agree with Amy. It's pretty hard to find evidence to show that. I will say, it's not
John,
just...
have you seen the first-person shooter video games that are? Have you watched some of these games? I mean, I've seen some just absolutely atrocious things that you're able to do holding on assault-looking rifle. I mean, it's a gun that mimics what these people seem to want to be doing, just mowing down innocent victims in town squares.
Yeah. I mean, the general problem is, in terms of doing empirical work, is you have to have some type of control. You know, here we have video games pretty much across the whole country. You know, if it was like some parts of the country, people would have video games relative to others, you know, then maybe we could try to control.
Anthony, can we say it's all of the above?
I think it's a little more than that. I think Amy spoke to it well. I think we live in a win-lose society. And what we see, and speaking of video games, now what we have is we have Instagram and the internet. So the people who are always look like they're winning, it's all in your face. So the guy who goes home, who doesn't get the girl, who's not popular at school, he becomes a little isolated. He feels a little isolated.
Yeah,
and then he wants to do these things that he sees other people do.
But it's the guy, it's not the gun, Anthony. Andrew,
well,
tell me about
Anthony's point is that it's...
John, I want to bring Andrew in here. Do we know the motivation, the mentality of the Parkland shooter?
Well, he was sick from the time he was in kindergarten. They all knew who was going to be the killer. You know, the kids saw something. They said, you know, they went to the authorities, and no one ever did anything. He was... They brought in his mental health.
Legally?
He bought it legally, and that's the problem, Eric. So you have these kids, when they're mentally ill, they need to be reported. So they're not able to purchase the rifle. Okay, so it's not the gun. You know, you have these. We can't control society, so it's like,
but
to
Amy,
me,
you can't report a client who you think is mentally ill or is unstable enough to maybe perpetrate.
Right, and actually each state has a different law regarding that, and Nevada happens to be different, and no disrespect, but sometimes patients come in and they're not fully disclosing everything that they need to get the proper help that they need as well.
in Florida we have the Baker Act,
and we can't.
which we've gotten a lot of bills passed in Florida.
Tell them when the Baker Act is where you can
Baker
go to
Act
court
is where
and
they're
say,
involuntarily mentally ill people that are a threat to themselves or to others are involuntarily hospitalized. And if you take that Baker Act to the full extent of the law, that could be put on their background. And that's where I think we're failing now as society.
John?
These people are not getting this put on their backgrounds to the full extent.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, in Parkland, there's lots of times where he could have been arrested, could have been convicted, it would have banned him from having. I guess my concern is if you really think somebody's mentally ill, just saying that they can't legally own a gun really isn't a serious solution to it, because there's so many ways that people can illegally get guns. I mean, it's almost like saying you can't buy drugs legally, so people won't buy drugs. I mean, the major source of illegal guns are drug dealers. So if you think people can go and buy drugs, they're going to be able to get guns. If you really believe one of the benefits of the Baker Act is that, and all the states have this, is that you can involuntarily commit the person.
All right, we have a lot more. I know, Anthony, you want to jump in there. We have a lot more of the panel coming up. But now, coming up, we hear from a nationally syndicated radio host and a staunch defender of the Second Amendment.
Rifles are only a tiny, barely a couple percentage points in terms of illegally used in homicides.
Coming up next, Dana Loesch joins us here on Your Voice, Your Future, Guns in America. Stay with us. I'd like to welcome Dana Loesch, who's a best-selling author and syndicated radio host, Dana, and also a staunch defender of the Second Amendment. Dana, there's a lot of talk of President Trump now possibly moving on background checks. What's the right thing to do given all the mass shootings lately in the news?
Yeah, well, and Eric, thank you so much for talking about this topic, and it's so good to see you. I hope that the president is sitting at the table with individuals who not only realize the importance of the Second Amendment, but also the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the 15th Amendment, because there are some proposals that are looking to undermine more rights than just the Second Amendment, where it concerns those universal background checks, for instance, which is ultimately just the criminalization of private transfers. There isn't any data that shows that the driver of crime, the driver of criminal usage, is actually coming from legal private transfers, which are also still federally regulated. No matter what state you're in, if you are a prohibited possessor, you're not allowed to possess or purchase or have anything transferred to you regardless. If only we would enforce the laws that we have in place. And so I hope that when the president is sitting down and he's talking with these lawmakers and they're bringing these proposals to him, I hope he weighs them, Eric, against what we have as already established law, and also weighs it against making sure that rights of law-abiding people are protected. Now, a quick note on the background checks. For instance, there was a story that just came out showcasing how in North Carolina alone, there are 145,000 cases. These are prohibited possessors. These are individuals who have had their day in court. They've been determined by a judge to be ineligible because of their crimes, but their cases weren't actually reported to the federal database that NICS checks at point of sale. When you go and fill out your 4473, you purchase a firearm. That information wasn't in the National Crime Information Center for NICS to check, and this isn't the first time this has happened. In fact, it's a pretty widespread problem, and we need to make sure that the law that exists that mandates reporting of this to NCIC is followed, and we have some penalties maybe perhaps implemented for not following that. So I hope the president considers that as well.
Dana, what about those who say the assault-style rifles, the weapons, the semi-automatics, the AR, the bushwhacker, that seems to show up in a lot of these mass shootings, are too much firepower for the average citizen? Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, they're not. I mean, they're semi-automatic rifles. Some of them are, I mean, they're just modern sporting rifles, and they're, I guess the ones that are popularized with that term and the term weapons of war, they're black, they have accessories on them. The assault weapons ban that Feinstein wrote back in the 90s, and she's kept reintroducing, it's kind of odd because it sort of acts as though semi-automatics have the same rate of fire as full auto, which they don't, which is why they're not full auto and why they're actually not weapons of war, because it's full auto. In fact, there was a Defense Department, I think it was an Army Field Guide manual. It was the only time that assault rifles actually ever been technically defined, and that was specifically defined as only fully automatic. And for individuals that are going after, say, the AR-15, which is 223 or 5.56, if you actually compare that to a 308 or a 30-06, then the argument seems to kind of dissipate, because you're specifically talking about one of the most commonly owned rifles and omitting the other rifles, because it is a step towards confiscation of not just rifles, but also semi-automatic firearms in general. That's why they use the term weapons of war. They're sort of moving from assault weapon to weapons of war, because that includes even bolt action rifles that snipers can use. It includes 9mm semi-automatic handguns that active duty carry. So really, it's a purposefully used term to conflate fully automatic and semi-automatic. And one other quick note on that, Eric, too, if you look at the FBI uniform crime reports, and I've gone back and I've looked at everything from 2012 to 2017, which is the last fully concluded report from the FBI on this, rifles are only a tiny, barely a couple percentage points in terms of illegally used in homicides. It's actually illegally possessed handguns and that's driven by repeat offenders.
So, Dan, I only have about 45 seconds or so. I agree with you. The bushwhacker, the AR are just fancy, really spiffed up regular rifles that could be a hunting rifle. However, talk to us a little bit about these multiple magazines, these 100 and 200 magazine clips, magazines holding that much ammunition, that many rounds. You know, when you think of a mass shooting, the time it takes to reload could be the difference between, 5 or 6 or 10 more lives taken.
Well, and to not be too clinical about it, really when you reload, it can only take maybe a second or less to even reload. I look at how law enforcement responded to that horrible murderer in Dayton, Ohio. I think it was 6 officers that used more than 58 rounds to neutralize that particular murderer. And I would like to think that we as law-abiding Americans have the same ability to defend ourselves when police can't be there with us all of the time. When I go to the range and I go and shoot with my family, I just, most of these are standard capacity magazines. I mean, people can get drums and things like that. But when you look at how difficult something like this is to enforce, because people can make this in their garages at home. I mean, I am not really great with power tools, but I can probably make it really easily in my garage, just given some time. And people can swap out magazines relatively quickly. So it seems to be a slippery slope, not just going after magazines, but also potentially going after ammunition. And then, Eric, things that you could ultimately end up using to manufacture magazines at home for your own personal use in your garage. So they'd have to go after a number of things to enforce that.
Dana, Loesch, thank you very much, and I bet you could assemble something like that in your garage, even if you aren't doing it. Dana, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric. Good to see you.
All right, we're going to say thank you to Dana Loesch. Anthony, your thoughts on what Dana said, and I think it was real important to point out that this whole hubbub over the AR rifle, it's not a fully automatic, it's semi-automatic, which means you have to pull the trigger every time you want a bullet to lodge, to fire. It just looks like a military-grade style rifle.
Right. Well, I want to address a couple of our points. We need to remember the Second Amendment is not absolute. A lot of things that we're pondering and that we argue about.
Explain that.
Well, the First Amendment is not absolute. You can't yell fire in the theater. That's the famous quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. So the same thing with the Second Amendment. The founders never contemplated some of the weapons that we have now. The original intent of the Second Amendment was that there would be a protection against a professional army, against the government. But now that we have a professional army, a lot of that loses its weight. So when I hear people talk about the Second Amendment, it has never been absolute. And it certainly hasn't been absolute to take guns.
Can you address this basic issue for most gun advocates, is that the bad guys don't need a background check. The bad guys don't need to jump through hoops. The bad guys can probably buy a gun cheaper on the street than it takes for a good guy to hold a handgun. And therefore, and think about this for 1 second, the lower income people, the lowest level of income people, sometimes it's minorities who are at the most risk because bad guys are getting the guns and they just can't afford sometimes, and John Law will point this out in a second, but a background check could cost $125 just for the check.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand that and I get that, but I just think there's smarter ways we can go about it. I grew up in Detroit. I've seen the damage that gun does, particularly in my community. I've seen people get shot. So I understand that, as opposed, this is on a daily level in Chicago, Detroit, New York. So I get that, but I just think that we have this ideal that, there's nothing we can do and there's ways we can solve it. And I think
John, are we misinterpreting the Second Amendment? Does the Second Amendment protect us against an overbearing, a tyrant government, or does it also allow us to hold any kind of firearm?
Look, I'm not a lawyer. Okay, I've taught in law schools, but that just makes me dangerous on it. To me, the way I look at it is what makes us safer or not. And everybody wants to try to keep criminals or other people from going and getting guns. The problem is gun control advocates could have gotten these background checks past 20 years ago if they were just willing to make a few very, I think, reasonable changes. So one thing, just talking about the cost, may not stop you or I from being able to buy a gun with $125, but the people that my research finds who benefit the most, poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas, the people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, they're the ones who benefit the most. Let me just finish for a second. And so the question is, if you believe that background checks reduce violent crime, and I don't, but if you do believe that, it reduces it for everybody. And as an economist, I would say the people who benefit should be the ones who pay. So pay for it out of general revenue. If you make that argument, you say you can get that, all you have to do is, if you believe it produces this benefit from everybody, make everybody pay. Gun control advocates will fight you tooth and nail against making that change. Another big problem is you frequently hear there are 3.5 million dangerous, prohibited people have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. Well, that's simply inaccurate. What they should say.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds. I want to bring these two into the discussion. But you make a very good point. If, and we'll ask our audience in a little bit, if the background check saves lives, why does it cost? Why don't we have it? We spend $4 trillion on a federal budget. Why doesn't this play part of the federal budget? What do you think of that, Andrew?
I think that I'm moving out into a rural area in Oregon. I shouldn't have to drive 45 minutes to do a background check. We could make it easy and simple and just do something online. That's that's not expensive, and I think everyone.
Now, your Republican friends will say,
no, I think they will be
say,
okay with it.
Too onerous, too much going on.
So I think everyone would be okay with it.
What is it about this literally, an AR-15 is a 22 caliber rifle that is I have a friend who's in the military who said any military person that went to war with an AR-15 is a moron because they'll be killed in 15 minutes. What is it that these people, these shooters, want it to look like, almost like Rambo, just bringing this big gun in and just.
But they don't use the guns there. If you look at only 13%, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Only 13% of the mass public shootings involves only a rifle. Over half of them involve only a handgun. You have over 80% of the attacks involve a handgun, either exclusively or in combination with something
but the
else.
higher the ones towards the upper end of the God forbid
That's not true.
This list of death tolls.
Virginia Tech, for example, there are other ones.
Texas, the shooting in Santa Fe after Parkland was
Yeah,
a
but
shotgun.
we're looking Parkland. We're looking at both of the shooters this past couple of weeks ago. We're looking at Las Vegas, also big long guns, big guns with a lot of capability, a lot of firepower. Amy, is there something going on here?
I'm not an expertise on this subject when it comes to what guns were used and were.
I just want to know. Yeah, I just want to know if there's some sort of mentality behind it.
Well, I think that it's multiple factors, and I think that we are looking at one area when we should be looking at multiple factors with regards to what is going on for people in society and one-upping another. Right? We're glorifying this. It's not to be glorified.
And we're putting everything in one's face. And you need to remember that 2% of those, only 2% of the people, a very tiny percent of those people who are causing all that crime in the cities where I come from, in Detroit.
Sure.
It's a tiny percentage.
Right.
So we could get to that. There's ways to get to that.
Can I just do this, guys? I know the control, we're running out of time. I just want you to play this. We don't even have to talk about it after. We don't have it. Okay. We're going to do this. We're going to come right back. We're going to speak to Clark County Commissioner Justin Jones. He was in Vegas when the largest mass shooting in U.S. history took place. We'll be right back. All right, we'd like to welcome Justin Jones. He's a Clark County Commissioner. Justin, you were in Las Vegas, not necessarily a commissioner at the time, but working with the state or with the county at the time of the largest mass murder in history, the 58 victims and one shooter killed in Las Vegas from Mandalay Bay. Tell us what we know now about that. There have been a lot of conspiracy theories. What do you know?
Well, sure. There was obviously a rogue shooter who decided to go forward with the largest mass shooting in history. Tragic situation, which not only killed a number of people, but caused severe traumatic experience for hundreds more. There was a significant investigation by our Metro Police Department into the shooter, and unfortunately they never really came up with a motive for the killing. Meanwhile, the victims continue to suffer from PTSD as a result of this tragedy.
Now, the shooter, Stephen Paddock, had quite a bit of an arsenal, a lot of firepower. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, he had acquired a number of firearms from other sources. Obviously, hundreds of rounds of ammunition that he used to unfortunately create this terror in our community here.
So, you had proposed some legislation, some background check legislation. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are you looking to do?
Sure. So back in 2013, I and my colleagues in the Nevada State Senate proposed legislation to increase background checks for all gun purchases here in Nevada. We were able to pass the legislature. It was fortunately vetoed by the governor at the time, but was passed by the voters in 2016 and implemented again in the 2019 legislative session. Background checks have been proven to save lives in the states in which they've been passed. We need a background check law for the entire state, the entire country, of course, but certainly in the states that have passed background check expansion, the gun deaths in those states have dropped.
So, do you think any background checks would have saved anyone's lives in the Mandalay Bay shooting?
No, I don't think that in the Mandalay Bay shooting specifically. But again, background checks aren't supposed to prevent all gun deaths. They are intended to make sure that those who are not supposed to be purchasing firearms have less access to firearms, whether it be a domestic violence situation or a mass shooting situation.
You know, and this town hall is on the heels of a couple of mass shootings. One in the one in Ohio, and then the other one in El Paso, Texas. And in both of those instances, there's pretty good documentation that additional background checks wouldn't have helped either one of these shooters get the firearms that they were using.
Right, and again, what I said is that background checks do save lives in the states that they have been passed in.
Can you tell me how they do then? I hear this all the time. We need more background checks because they'll save lives. Explain to me how.
Sure. So again, Eric, many of the mass shootings are the ones that draw the most attention from the media. However, on a daily basis, hundreds of people are shot and unfortunately killed as a result of access to firearms. So in the case of someone who wants to obtain a firearm, who shouldn't have a firearm, whether it be a felon or someone who has been deemed a danger to themselves or others by a court, if they can...
Those are already banned. People who are felons or dangerous to others are already not allowed to own firearms under the current laws. You're looking for beefed up background checks. I go back to the same example. In Chicago, one of the most difficult places to get a firearm, a handgun, background checks won't help all the people who are dying in Chicago because those are by and large being perpetrated on people with illegal handguns anyway.
Background checks will save lives if we pass universal background checks against all states. Again, if you're using Chicago as an example,
I'm not trying to be combative.
I
just want you to tell me how. I'm not trying to be combative. Tell me how a background check will save lives.
A background check in the Chicago example would save lives because in states across the border from Illinois do not have universal background checks laws like Illinois does. So if we implement background checks across all states, including states like Indiana across the border, then there would be less access to firearms.
But Justin, these people are killing, they're killing with guns that aren't registered anyway. The serial numbers are scraped off. What you're asking us to do is to believe is that background checks will save lives. I will tell you that there's good information, there's good documentation, there's good research that shows that when you apply an expensive background check for a handgun, you're taking that protection, that gun, out of the hands of people who are most likely to be targets of an illegal firearm, and that means poor people, minorities.
Again, the statistical information from states in which have implemented background checks for private sales, which is what we're talking about here. Obviously, as you mentioned, if you go into a licensed gun dealer right now, a person who is a felon or has been deemed a danger to themselves or others can't buy a firearm if they go into a licensed dealer. However, they can go in the parking lot and buy it out of the trunk of someone's car. And so the purpose of background checks is to reduce that access. Right. And it has been successful in the states in which it has been passed.
Okay, we're going to leave right there. Justin Jones, thank you very much. Again, Clark County Commissioner right here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you. John, what about that? What about what's called the background loophole? Talk to us about that.
Well, I mean, there's so many statements he made. Like, first of all, I wish you could point to one mass public shooting this century that would have been stopped if these laws had been in effect. There's not one that would have been stopped.
But so I asked him about that. He didn't have an answer. But right. I want to hone in on this because
right.
This is something I don't. I'm as pro 2A as they come, and I can't figure out if I go to a gun show, can I buy a gun without a background check, or can I buy a gun and hand it to someone else that is a relative?
Sure. I mean, it depends on the state that you're in, but any dealer has to do a background check, whether they do it in the gun show or they do it at their store. But a private individual in some states, they can sell you a gun, without a background check.
Is that a bad idea?
Look, I wish background checks would stop criminals from being able to go and get guns.
Agreed.
But the thing is, despite what he says, there's a huge amount of academic research out there that just doesn't find it has an impact. And the problem is that a major source of illegal guns are drug dealers. And, it's just as hard to stop people from buying illegal drugs as it is to stop them from buying.
But it's not drug dealers going out killing mass people at one time. It's not drug dealers going into soft markets.
Most of the murders in the United States are probably drug gang related.
Those are drug wars. We're talking about people who are going into churches, into libraries.
I know, but the point is these people are planning these things 6 months, a year, 2 years, 2.5 years in advance. It'd be nice if you could stop them.
And John, I don't mean to cut you off, but we do have to agree that the mass shootings that we've heard of, these guns are by and large legally purchased. They're background checked and legally purchased. So more background checks isn't going to stop these mass. Go ahead, Andrew. You want to jump in on this?
Well, I really think that, like when people are talking their anti-Second Amendment, my daughter was a victim, right? So that's what I'm never going to let anyone around me be a victim. Okay, because my daughter was on that 3rd floor, and she was waiting for the police to come and help her, and everyone failed her. So for people to say that we don't need this gun or that gun, I'm never giving up my guns.
Well, let me ask you this.
I'm never going to be a victim.
And this is something I talked to a lot of
the
Parkland victim, the young people who are out there doing a great job. And they're both on both sides of it. We need more gun control. We need more guns in the hands of good people. What should schools and gymnasium, what should places like that, what should they do to become more safe?
Well, we did a lot of research, so I'm not just going to say what I think. Comes on over 1.5 years of research, a commission put together by our governor back then, Rick Scott. You need to train personnel at the school to be able to defend our students when someone comes in the building. You need sheriffs. You need mental health. You need hardening.
Should teachers be allowed to carry
voluntarily if they want to go through this program that we developed in Florida? Yes. If you want your kids safe they want to volunteer, then why should we be the one to say they're not going to be able to defend themselves or their students?
I understand your point of view. My heart goes out to you. But I am totally against teachers. Teachers are there to teach. Teachers cannot be duality trained to handle guns.
So John, I know the stat he's about to. I know, John. Here's my question though. If these are soft targets, these are young people who are a lot of times locked in a building. They can't get out because the doors are locked. Because they don't want to go out smoking pot or whatever, and they're being killed. They're being killed in
nobody's coming in to save them.
What's the answer? Why not teach her?
Have someone trained.
What's wrong with the teacher?
We can protect all of our top actresses, athletes daily. We can't protect 15 kids by hiring someone who is trained only with the gun to stand outside that room.
No.
Financially, that doesn't make any sense.
John, if you're a teacher and you want to hold up, before I get to you, because I know you got the stat that's going to crush this thing. What about Amy? If a teacher wants to hold a gun and keep his or her classroom safe,
and it's a 145-hour course. It's not like they go for the weekend and they could carry Monday. It's 140 hours of training.
Here's what I know. What I know is there is a fallout from these shootings. It's a ripple effect. I have families coming to me because school just started, and they're already talking to the principal about what's going to happen. There's a fear that resonates with them.
Bulletproof backpacks. I kid you not, folks. Bulletproof backpacks are the rage.
What is that doing for our generations to come?
What is it?
Yeah, it's a mental impact. It's fear that leads generations. So there's more than one solution. I'm saying that we need to come together and have something on the table.
What solution? I hear a lot of rhetoric. I hear a lot of we need to come together. We need a lot of things.
I'm not an expert on the background checks or not, but
forget background checks. Let's be more pragmatic.
Okay, pragmatic is we need more systematic controls, and every dynamic, every new thing that comes along, it takes trial and error. I don't think we should let go of the background checks. I don't think we should stop just there. I think we need to add to it.
Right, but why should
Anthony, I've moved on. I've moved on to why not? Why don't we have teachers who are registered to carry a gun, who've been trained to carry a gun, who want to keep their classroom safe? Coaches, how about coaches? How about priests? How about anywhere there's a soft target where a bad guy knows that they can walk in there and likely not come up against any firepower? John, give me the stats on schools now.
Okay. Well, I mean, just for Anthony's thing, having an armed guard there, they have an incredibly difficult job if somebody's identified as a guard. The killers, when they come in there, have a huge strategic advantage. They either wait for the guard to leave, or they pick another target, or the guard is the first person they kill. Because if they know the
Give
guard
us the
is
numbers now. Give me the numbers. I want these people to understand what your research has found.
Right. Well, we've looked at all the school shootings from 2000 through the end of last year. There's 20 states that have teachers that carry guns. There's not one school shooting of any type that's occurred at any of the schools that allow teachers to carry guns. There's been an increase in shootings, but the increase has been entirely in those places that haven't allowed teachers to carry. So you have a choice.
Not 20 schools, folks. 20 school districts.
20 states.
20 states.
Right.
And
And it varies a
How
lot.
many schools are we talking?
Well, you're talking about something like over 2,000 school districts in the country.
Districts
Right.
who have experienced how many? Zero.
Right.
Zero incidences of gun death.
No mass shootings, no attacks of any type that have occurred there. You know, the question you have to ask yourself, does it make a difference to have a sign in front of your school or your home that would say this place is a gun-free zone? Would you put a sign like that in front of your home if somebody was honestly stalking you? The question is, these people, when you look at the attention that they want to get, you can't read their diaries or other things and not come away with the notion that they want to go to a place where they know they can kill as many people as possible. And if you, in the advantage of having a teacher as opposed to a
let me
guard,
back this up, Anthony. Let me back
in.
John up here
Okay.
for a second. There was just last week, there was someone who walked in, who was brought down in Orlando, and he had in his diary, on his Reddit account, he wanted to kill as many people as he could. Anthony, how many more people are you going to kill in a soft target where you know there's no guns and a lot of people are congregating, versus you don't know which corner you're going to go around or which classroom you're going to walk in. You could come up against a Magnum.
No, I think that's great, and I think your statistics are great. All I'm saying is we don't need to arm the teachers. Put someone in each room who is trained to handle a gun.
Well,
only.
Each room.
Each room.
That's
Each
how
room.
many people
Because
that
we
get
spend
to.
more
How many people
money.
would that be?
We spend
Florida
more
spent
money
half
on
a
a lot
billion
of other
dollars.
situations.
Florida was spending $500 million a year to put one guard in each public school.
Now, how
Just
many
one
shootings-
guard.
how many shootings
One guard in
happened?
school. I got to leave it right there. Up next,
Well,
we
yeah,
hear
Parkland.
from. Guess who we're going to hear from? We're going to hear from someone coming up right next.
I'm the majority. I'm a law-abiding citizen who's never shot anybody, never committed a serious crime, never committed a felony. I've never done anything like that. But it seems like every time we have one of these shootings, nobody wants to put the blame where it goes, which is at the shooter's feet. You want to put it at my feet. You want to turn around and restrict my right.
Well, that was a very, very passionate Mark Robinson, who is a pro-gun advocate. Now, what really is important to me, the panel's been great. They're still here. I wanted to hear from you, so we brought the audience up. And let's start with a couple of people from Rancho High School right here in Las Vegas. Step up to the mic and state your name if you want. If not, just ask your question of anyone or a comment.
Hi, I'm Jalen.
And your question is?
Our question is, what are ways we can prevent school gun violence in our schools today, right now?
Well, let me ask you this, Andrew. What have you found in your research? And by the way, this is Veronica.
A lot of it is, a lot of these kids know who the shooter is before it ever happens. So I would say you should speak up, talk to your parents, talk to the officer at the school, your teacher, and don't ignore it, because that's usually the first line of defense is the kids at the school. They know who the shooter's going to be.
Amy, what do you think about this?
I also think that it would be helpful for more public service announcements denoting, mental health concerns with people in schools that might feel isolated or have stigmatization that they're not going to the counselors for help, things like that.
Yeah, always. If you see something, say something. Above all things, talk to your parents, talk to your teachers, talk to your coaches. Thank you very much. Let's bring this person up next. Your name?
I'm Maggie with Women's Defense Network.
Question?
Yes, my question is, and first and foremost, as a Latin American woman and an educator of firearms and their uses, I depend on my firearm to use as a tool of last resort in the event that there's imminent danger to me or someone else. What other laws do you feel that you could impose on law-abiding citizens like myself that would actually make us safer?
Well, I'm more concerned. I don't want to impose any laws. I don't want any laws imposed on you. But what I'm more concerned about is when you, and I'm not talking about you specifically, when you get depressed, when you have a bad day, when you go through a divorce. I'm more concerned, me and Amy, we're more concerned about that. And we're trying to say, what root causes can we get to? And right now, the only place we are is more universal background checks. But remember, as I said earlier, the Second Amendment is not absolute.
All right, thank you for your question. Step up to the plate.
Very good.
Name?
Ken Ortega, Homeland Personal Protection. So you said, universal background checks. So now it's universal background checks. Next, it's red flag laws. We kind of feel that those may not stop very violent, or violent attacks, or very many. So what's next? Where does it stop?
Is it
what
a
happens
slippery
after
slope?
that? Yes.
Well, hold on. Let me ask John. Have we seen in states that have decided to increase their gun control laws? Do they continue to look for more? Is it a creep?
Yeah, no, it's constant. To be honest, I've kind of adopted the view that over time they're just trying to figure out new ways to make it costly for people to be able to have guns. We hear about universal background checks. I wish there was some evidence that they would stop suicides. I don't know of anything that would stop suicides. You look at these things, they keep on being put forward after attacks that have nothing to do with the law that's being put forward. I'll give you one simple example. In Colorado, a few years ago, when they're passing their background checks on private transfers, I got a call from some state legislators asking me what amendment I would put up. And my suggestion was to put up an amendment that would exempt people below the poverty level from having to pay the new state tax on transferring guns. With the exception of 2 pro-gun Democrats in the state house, every other Democrat...
What was their beef?
Well, their beef was that they thought it was important to fund the program.
Fully funded, not
right.
Just for...
But people below the poverty level, how many taxes can you think of that Democrats will fight tooth and nail against exempting people below the poverty level from having to pay?
Let me bring these guys in. What are your names?
Hello, my name's Yoselin, and this is Angela, and we're from Rancho High School. My question to you is, why is it that mass shootings have been such a common theme here in America?
Let me say, well, go ahead, John, say it. I want Amy to follow up on this.
Right. If you look at the 20 years from 1998 through 2017, the United States makes up less than 1% of the mass public shooters around the world. We make up 4.6% of the world population, so we're way below the average. We just don't hear these attacks. So you hear New Zealand, but you probably don't know within 24 hours of the New Zealand attack, there was a mass public shooting at a school in Brazil and another shooting in the Netherlands.
You stop. You're giving us a lot of stats. You know what I care about? Look at that camera right there. I care about these people. These people, this is what it's all about. It's the young people. It's their world. I don't want them to go to school feeling afraid to go to school. Amy, how do we stop this? How do we talk to these young people and say, it's okay, you can go to school. You're going to be safe in school?
By recognizing that there is a need for more mental health awareness and funding. And it's about helping people feel comfortable talking to people when they don't.
Are you guys scared? Are you nervous? Are you scared about going to school? Are you worried about a shooting, a mass shooting?
I am, because it's become such a common thing. It happens anywhere from Walmart to a church to schools.
Are you worried about going to school specifically?
Yeah.
Are you worried also?
Not really.
Why not?
There's always going to be a sort of threat to you, and it's just like living up to it. You can't just live your life in fear. So I'm not going to stop going to school just because there's somebody that wants to shoot us, or I'm just not going to stop doing the things I do in
Can
my
I respond to that?
Please do.
Here's the thing, and I understand the way you feel, but I was just talking to Amy about this. We find out that trauma is generational. It's also contagious. Did you see, and I travel to New York a lot, did you see people in Manhattan running when they heard the backfire of a car? That's our psychology. That's where we're at. These are all people who consider themselves healthy or who wouldn't think twice about going to school.
Clearly,
we're here. This is where we're at now.
Clearly, America not only is divided on the gun issue, we are petrified.
Exactly.
We're in fear. We want to remove this fear. John, you're 100% right that we are protected and probably safer because of the Second Amendment. I mean, the bottom line is I believe that a good guy with a gun, we have a couple of them over there, will always be the best deterrent to a bad guy with a gun. Not a background check, not finding out whether or not they're having
I desperately want to do something to stop these attacks. For 20 years I've been doing. But the thing is, you have to look. They keep on picking these soft targets.
You want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. You don't even want to try anything that might be good.
This is what we did. This is exactly why we did this town hall. They're still going. They're still going. But we really did it for you guys. These are the people we care about. Want to say thank you to KSNV right here in Las Vegas. Want to say thank you to Sinclair Broadcast. Want to say thank you to the state of Nevada. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.